together in travels.
This podcast series is brought to you by Destination Canada, a land of breathtaking natural beauty, meaningful experiences, and warm, welcoming people. Canada is a place where every journey connects you more deeply to nature, culture, and community. Start your journey today at www.keepexploring.com.au.
I think something that really sets Frontiers North apart, we're from there. I grew up there. We're going to be there in the future. It matters who owns what. And we're just really proud that we are a Manitoba-based, Canadian-owned and operated tourism company in a small little burg like Churchill, where we are a mile deep. You know, this is more like my goals and our goals as a company, but it's about community economic development and contracting services with other operators in the community. It's about developing tourism infrastructure for our community. Yeah, it's about community. We talk about our purpose being to share in the stewardship of the communities and environments in which we operate, and that's really what it boils down to for us.
Today, I'm thrilled to welcome John Gunter, President and CEO of Frontiers North Adventures, based in Churchill, Manitoba, a remote subarctic community perched on the edge of Canada's vast tundra, and also known as the polar bear capital of the world. Churchill is one of the few places on Earth where you can experience the raw beauty of the Arctic, from the spectacular northern lights and roaming polar bears to thousands of migrating beluga whales each summer. It's a place where climate, culture, and conservation intersect. Under John's leadership of this proud 35-year-old family-owned business, Frontiers North Adventures has become a Certified B Corp and a shining example of how tourism can operate as a force for good. Through community partnerships, environmental stewardship, and unforgettable wildlife experiences, the company is helping lead Canada's shift toward more sustainable and regenerative travel. So whether you're a curious traveller or a travel professional, you're in for an inspiring conversation. John shares his insights and practical ways of wonderful Manitoba. Hello, John, and thank you so much for joining us. Where does this podcast find you today?
I am actually in my stuffy office in downtown Winnipeg in the Exchange District, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site here in downtown Winnipeg.
Tell us a little bit more about the location of where you are, particularly the Arctic and the North. What makes it so unique for travellers visiting?
Yeah, so Churchill, Manitoba is decidedly subarctic. So it's something really important for us to differentiate is that the Arctic Circle is, I think, almost 1,000 kilometers north of Churchill, which would be 2,000 kilometers north of where I'm sitting right now. And Arctic, being able to deliver that, crossing that Arctic Circle, that political boundary, is an important deliverable for our colleagues up in Nunavut. And it's not something that we focus on or that we can deliver in Churchill. So I love Churchill. I love being in the subarctic. What's unique about the location in Churchill is it's interesting in that we've got 4 different ecosystems that converge right at Churchill. We've got the boreal forest from the south, the taiga kind of from the west-ish, which is a Russian word meaning like a little forest. And then further to the north, coming from the north, we have the tundra. And of course, the marine ecosystem. And all these ecosystems converge right at Churchill, which originally resulted in sort of like a really dramatic array of wildlife in the Churchill region. Everything from Arctic fox, red fox, caribou, moose, the occasional wolverine passes through and gets everybody excited. And then, of course, our marine mammals like ring seals and beluga whales. And of course, what we're best known for in Churchill is our polar bears. I can only speculate that on account of this sort of like convergence of wildlife at Churchill, that over the years, historically, this is where Indigenous and Inuit people would meet. They'd come to meet and trade and fight in Churchill. So, in Churchill, we've got Dene people coming from the west. We've got Cree people historically coming kind of from the southish, Inuit people from the north. And then since colonization, Churchill has become the homeland of the Métis people. In addition to all that, Churchill's really cool in that it lies directly under the auroral oval. So we get we get amazing northern lights in Churchill.
Wow, that is a lot of offerings right there. I mean, Churchill is the polar bear capital of the world.
Self-proclaimed.
But self-proclaimed. but that's just one fraction of what is a much bigger story and offering for travelers.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it is historically Churchill, and arguably one of Canada's calling cards have been Churchill's polar bears. And as time goes by, beluga whales, which have always been there, we've always had literally thousands of beluga whales in the Churchill River estuary every summer, become a lot more fun to interact with because we can share. We could just take our waterproof mobile phones and dump our hand in the water and get some really cool trophies. We can collect these trophies of beluga whales tracking alongside the boats. And these are the pictures and videos coming off of our phones. And then even more recently, it's way easier to capture these images of the northern lights with these cameras have this night shot stuff, right? So you don't need a tripod and a SLR camera with f1.8 lens and all this technical stuff. You just hold your breath. You kind of lean up against a rigid surface and you take a picture with your phone, and you end up getting these amazing northern lights photographs with your phones that, like, it's a trophy that our guests are able to take back that they captured themselves. They can say, I got this one. This is my picture.
So let's just talk about the people up there.
Well, so this is really interesting. So, Frontiers North, we deliver these export ready, to get inside baseball here on tourism. We deliver these export ready experiences for our guests. And I think where we found success, mutual success with Indigenous tour operators in Churchill, is that they are more likely to be doors open or market ready as opposed to export ready. Over these years, we've been doing this since the mid 80s, is including Indigenous tourism experiences, market-ready Indigenous tourism experiences from around Churchill, and including those in our export-ready itineraries and experiences we provide our guests. So there is no shortage of amazing experiences like dog sledding or with a Métis tour operator, Wapusк Adventures. Another interesting one that we work with is Dene Routes and I'm sure similar to Australia, there's some horrific stories involving colonialization and Indigenous people, is the forced relocate, like kind of addressing this forced relocation of Dene people from a place called Tadoule Lake to Churchill, in the 50s and 60s sort of thing. And this experience that we have with Florence at Dene Routes is her kind of sharing this experience and taking along on this journey from darkness to light and ending on a message of hope. And even though we confront these difficult topics and conversations like Indigenous reconciliation, it's about a hopeful future and where are we going next. So it's still trying to deliver for our guests an adventure of a lifetime and confronting what end up being some difficult truths along the way. We find this to be important. We find that guests will self-report having had a transformative travel experience if, as a tour operator, and our guides are knocking our guests off kilter and putting our guests into disorienting dilemmas where we're having conversations about sort of coming at ideas from a different perspective. These are some of the things that we're very happy to partner with Indigenous tour operators in Churchill to address our respective roles in Indigenous reconciliation, at the same time deliver for our guests these transformative travel experiences.
Talking about your guides, I mean, they are such a critical factor to the overall guest experience, of course, particularly in a location like yours. Can you give us a bit of a sense of the sort of different backgrounds of some of those guides and I guess what they sort of bring to the experience?
Yeah. So, Churchill's a small community. I think the latest census has somewhere around 900 people that live in Churchill. And it's actually probably lower than that. So when we look at staff within our team and guide staff, it's a priority for us to be employing Northerners and Churchillians and Indigenous folks in these frontline roles to engage with our guests. But the reality is that, we're hiring people that are coming to Churchill. They're professional guides, they're tourism professionals that are coming from other areas in Canada to help us deliver these experiences in Churchill. So what makes me feel good about that, being kind of forced to continue to hire guides that are coming from other places in Canada, is that we've got like decades-long relationships with so many of our guides. A few years ago, we celebrated one of our guides had been with us for 30 years. We have a number of guides that have just eclipsed 20 years with us, and another handful that have 10 years with us under their belt. We're really humbled, I think, that in the calendar of these tourism professionals, that every year they elect to come back and help us out. And help guide our trips in Churchill. We're just really excited about that. It's super cool that we've, and not only are these guides, they're our friends. You know what I mean? Like, we walk through fire together. We have a lot of fun up there, Matt. Come on.
It sounds incredible. And I can only imagine that diversity, as you said, just adds to the whole story, in terms of bringing it to life for so many different people, in terms of the diversity your travelers represent as well.
Yeah, totally. So just to kind of quickly go back to our staff, before we move on to travelers, is we recently published our latest impact report, over 90 pages of receipts that we've been collecting over the years. And just off the top of my head, I know I've got one of them kicking around here somewhere, but off the top of my head, I think out of our permanent full-time year-round team of about 35 people, 20% of them self-identify as Indigenous, and over 60% identify as women. So just proud to have a lot of women in the company, leading the company, within the ranks, a lot of Churchillians, Northerners, and Indigenous folks helping us deliver these trips.
Well, let's talk about your history as a business. Now, 25 years, congratulations. That's already a huge legacy. And you've been at the forefront of sustainable and regenerative tourism throughout that journey. Can you give us a little bit of a background on the journey itself?
Yeah, sure. So Frontiers North started in 1987. So I think we're closer up to north of 30 years here. And over the years have acquired some companies that have even more history. So, in the late 90s, we acquired the Tundra Buggy Tours and Activities business unit, which started in 1979. And then a few years later acquired a hotel property called the Tundra Inn, which was started up, I think, in the early 70s, maybe 71 or 72. So we've got a lot of institutional knowledge, as we roll into the Frontiers North years that started in 1987. So to answer your question about, for lack of a better term, the sustainability front, it was efforts, I'd say, in the early 2000s that we went to index. We wanted to index our environmental initiatives. We're operating in a sensitive environment amongst these polar bears, and knowing that there was a market demand from our guests to know how we were holding up our end of the bargain as it related to, like, in the environment. And so it was then that we started sort of documenting things that we were already doing and got keyed into communities like the Canadian Business for Social Responsibility. A number of years later, we published our first corporate social responsibility report based on something super boring called the Global Reporting Initiative Standard. So going through that CSR reporting, GRI standard process, and then even a few years later after that, going through the B Corp certification process, we ended up learning a lot. We went in this trying to better organize what we're doing on the environmental side. And having gone through those processes, we really learned a lot on how, like, the importance of employee engagement, community engagement, reconciliation. We went in on the environmental side, we ended up beefing up the social side, and has just been a really good process for us to go through over the years. And most recently sort of represented by our B Corp certification, that when we earned it in 2020, we were the first B Corp certified travel and tourism company in Canada, and have recently recertified. What I like about this B Corp certification is it's not first past the post. It requires these recertifications every 3 years, and they get harder. So you can't just resubmit what you did last year or last cycle. It's about continuous improvement, and it's really about the iterating on track record and goals and track record and goals. So yeah, really pumped with what we've managed to sort of pull together in that regard. And what's interesting about this stuff is like, these are goals that we have as a company, right? We want to have our finger on the pulse on our greenhouse gas emissions, whatever, and reduce those. But some of our guests care about that. Some of our guests couldn't care less about that. And one of the interesting innovations that's come through this is we looked at our business, we said, where's our biggest GHG emissions coming from? And it was our fleet of tundra buggies. So in 2018, we started developing this technology to convert our tundra buggies from diesel to electric, which we did. Our first one, we rolled out our first EV tundra buggy in November 21. And we've got 3 in the fleet to date. And we're working on our 4th this year. This is sort of like when we try and boil this down and try and have what might differentiate a company like Frontiers North from others out there in the marketplace. That B Corp certification helps us jump off the page, and a good example of those efforts can be kind of rolled up in what we're doing with our fleet of EV tundra buggies. It's about, no, we're not competing with the sound of a big diesel engine. You know, we don't have to cut the engine in order to have a conversation. We're just silently navigating beneath the northern lights and amongst these wild polar bears. And who cares about GHG emissions?
Yeah.
Like, that's cool.
We'll be right back after this. Ready to discover Canada's warmth, wonder and wide open spaces? Connect with a local Canadian travel expert who can help you make your dream trip a reality. And if you're a travel professional, you can continue to enhance your destination knowledge through the Canada Specialist Program, which provides you with insider tips and exclusive tools. Find out more in this episode's show notes. And that's probably the key point here, isn't it? That word sustainability, it really means lots of different things to different people. And so there's a sort of, I guess, a movement to say, well, it should just be baked in anyway. And if it's an amazing guest experience, and then maybe the traveller finds out later that actually, oh, by the way, this was actually a really good way to protect the environment in the process, then even better. And you've created perhaps an ambassador who's going to go away and tell other people.
A critique that's come back from our guests is that they wish, in advance of booking, they wish they knew more about the initiatives that we're involved with as it relates to polar bear conservation, for example, and our work amplifying the messages from Indigenous tour operators in Churchill. So we're kind of turning the page on a marketing position of strictly selling the romance of locking your gaze with a wild polar bear or dining beneath the northern lights. With confidence, right? We've got the receipts. With confidence, kind of going forward with more stewardship messaging in our marketing.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I mean, coming back to the tundra buggy, I mean, these things are sexy beasts. Let's just say that. We're talking 4 meters high. I really had no idea just how big these things are. Share a little bit more with us about that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So tundra buggies were developed in the late 70s as a platform for goofy tourists to get out amongst these wild polar bears and come back with all of our limbs intact. It's really about keeping bears and people safe from each other, and in a sort of like in a predictable manner on an established network of trails to wander out into, you know, what we affectionately refer to as buggy land, where it tends that these bears have tended to aggregate over the years at certain times during the year. They're so big, in order to keep people and bears safe from each other. And then the other part of that is, as Hudson Bay starts to freeze during the autumn, we're dealing with a lot of ice formation, crawling in and out of water holes and small ponds. And it's in some situations, like it's literally at least 2 meter drop or climb that we're doing off of like a flat surface, where we're crawling up 2 meters and getting onto a thing and crawling down 2 meters. So this is where, you know, we joke around, we call them giant Kleenex boxes on monster truck tires. But that's the reason. There's a reason that we do it that way. So of course, you know, everybody's comfortable and warm on the inside, and the ability to kind of get on the back deck or slide down the windows and capture those trophies. You want to take some pictures or
Mm.
just really just lock your gaze with a wild polar bear. Maybe it
Mm.
chuffs up some stinky polar bear breath that you get to smell. And
Oh, goodness me. And I mean, feedback wise, what's some of the feedback you get? This is such an out of worldly kind of experience.
yeah, so I should make clear that we have three sort of distinct touring seasons throughout the year.
Mm.
February and March, we're out dining beneath the northern lights, snowshoeing, fat biking, discovering Churchill's unique northern charm, dog sledding, doing some really cool stuff. And then we kind of take a break for a bit. We get back at it during July and August, where we're spending a lot of time out on the Churchill River estuary. And we are everything from like a larger Transport Canada approved 30-ish passenger vessel for whale watching down to 8 guest Zodiacs, down to kayaks, stand-up paddle boards. Man, it's one of Churchill's best kept secrets is being out there amongst these beluga whales. And it's one of these things where they're tracking alongside the boat. They like to kind of play in the surf of the prop behind the boat. And it's one of these things where it's like picking a point on the horizon, slowly and predictably navigating towards it. And then the whales just kind of come check us out. Super cool. So that's July and August, and then October, November is our peak polar bear season, and so these bears are aggregating near Churchill, waiting for the ice on Hudson Bay to freeze. We take advantage of that aggregation. We get out on this network of established trails, and we view and photograph polar bears out there, and just have a lot of fun.
Are you seeing different kinds of travelers?
Of course, our guests they just keep getting younger, right? And so it is been a bit of a pull from the guests for us to include more active components in our trips. And this is where, whether it's coastal hike out along the coast or fat biking, these are the things where, we got to remind ourselves that we're still in bear country. We still have bear guards accompanying us on those activities. And, it's something that just personally, it's what we like to do too. We like to be out there and we like to be jumping in the river. It's not warm, probably about 4 or 5 degrees Celsius, but we're jumping in the river and getting out there on in the intertidal zone when the tide's out and kind of hiking, doing some coastal hikes. So, and the fat bikes is a fun activity during the winter and during the summer, but it's something where autumn or October, November polar bear tour season, we're just really forced to not be able to do that sort of thing. I grew up in Churchill, right? So I grew up bred into me with this primal fear that the world's largest land roving carnivore is lurking around every dark corner. You just don't go outside alone during bear season. It's really about safety. So this is kind of what we're up against. And over time, how it's sort of shook out on our schedule is we've kind of like a classic tour, fewer these days, fewer photography specialist tours, but still some photography tours. We do family departures. We do, groups departures for special interest groups, whatever. And what's really interesting, what ends up being a really popular departure that we've pioneered, we call this franchise of trips our conservation journeys. It's a double entendre. I'll let you think about it for a sec. These conservation journeys are where we're getting out. We have a polar bear conservation journey and a beluga whale conservation journey. And in addition to our guides and our teams out on the tundra, we're also working with conservation organizations, connect with scientists that accompany our trip. So this is polar bear subject matter experts and researchers, and we work with Polar Bears International on that trip. And then on our conservation journey beluga whale trip, we work with beluga whale researchers that are joining us from an organization called Rain Coast Foundation that they got a really strong beluga whale research team. So this is just like another layer of how guests are kind of showing us that they're interested in getting below the surface of our destination. They want to kind of take a peek behind the curtain and see how things are operating. And, why is there so much interest in a destination like Churchill as it relates to, some of the charismatic megafauna that we were blessed with their presence with these polar bears and beluga whales.
Are there any sort of standout stories for you that, where you see what you do has really transformed the community? I know you talked a little bit about the actual workforce, but are there other things that stand out in your time?
I think something that really sets Frontiers North apart, we're from there. I grew up there. We're going to be there in the future. It matters who owns what. And we're just really proud that we are a Manitoba-based, Canadian-owned and operated tourism company in a small little burg like Churchill, where we are a mile deep. This is more of like my goals and our goals as a company, but it's about community economic development and contracting services with other operators in the community. It's about developing tourism infrastructure for our community. Yeah, it's about community. We talk about our purpose being to share in the stewardship of the communities and environments in which we operate. And that's really what it boils down to for us.
Brilliant. Now let's talk about some practical insights, I guess, for our travel professional audience.
If you're going to be coming all the way from Australia to Canada, I think it makes sense to link a few experiences together. If it's the Canadian Rockies during the winter, why not experience an additional iconic Canadian destination in Churchill for Northern Lights during the winter at the same time? Or, complementing a July, August, maybe city tour in Vancouver or Montreal, and coming up to Churchill and tacking on a few days to go kayaking amongst beluga whales. Sort of contrasting maybe big city with small town. I love going to big cities just as much as the next person. I really recharge my batteries in places like Churchill. You know what I mean? It's getting out into the wild, out in nature, experiencing wildlife.
Pretty special. What can I say? I hope I get to experience it soon, as I'm sure many of our listeners will be thinking the same thing. Looking ahead, what does the next chapter look like?
We're really excited, having really built out everything new out on the tundra. We've backed our way into the community of Churchill. We're really excited about this hotel renovation and expansion that's underway, helping partners in small Indigenous tour operators continue to develop their product and helping amplify their message. Matt, I hope things slow down. It's been a real busy few years for us over here. You know what I mean? Like, I just want to put it in cruise control for a while. I have a feeling we're not going to have that luxury. We've reached this point in Churchill's evolution where all this old infrastructure has reached the point of diminishing returns. Further investments in this old stuff we're not going to get much out of it. We're listening to our guests, and it sounds like they're excited about it too.
Can't wait to hear what the next chapter looks like. What's your message for our Australian trade?
We're excited for the return of Australians visiting Canada and the numbers that we saw pre-pandemic. And a lot of that has to do with airlift between our two great countries. And we're getting there, and we're here for it. And Frontiers North has been present in Australia for, I want to say about 15 years prior to the pandemic. And we're looking forward to get back at it this coming September.
Well, thank you, John. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you today, and congratulations on everything that you've achieved as a business. You're a standout operator up there, and I think it's really inspirational to hear all of the work that you're doing and have done, and really exciting to hear about what's coming next as well. So wishing you all the best for the next incoming season, and really hope that, myself, and certainly I know a lot of our audience listeners as well, will be hoping that they can meet you in person up there and get up there on that big sexy tundra buggy and see it for ourselves.
Really great chatting with you here today. So thank you for your time.
John's leadership at Frontiers North Adventures reminds us that the goal of achieving tourism that positively impacts communities, protects the environment, and offers unforgettable experiences along the way is absolutely possible. His commitment to tourism for good provides a roadmap for travellers and travel professionals to help discover the year-round wonders of Manitoba. Don't forget to check the show notes for useful links and resources and for more information on today's episode. Into the Hearts of Canada is a Carry On Podcast original series hosted by me, Matt Leadham. Executive producer for Carry On Podcasts is myself, Matt Leadham, and all podcast production is by Cassie Walker.
Want more from Carry On? Listen to more Carry On podcasts wherever you like to listen.